Today we'll follow up on a previous episode of Best Obscure Amiga Games You've Never Heard of, with a selection of 10 completely new and little known titles that not only were quite good in their own right, but also deserved to gain much wider reach and popularity. They're in variety of genres, same as last time, so hopefully anyone should be able to find something interesting to play here, or at the very least learn about some games that never reached their full potential. Kinda like me, astronaut, lawyer, doctor, entertainer, only not really. These two, huge hits, AAA releases, and also not really. But the difference is that they actually deserved more, and I can only blame myself. So, without further ado, let's get to it. To say that Burton Bird is unusual for the platformer would be an understatement. Apart from the goal of each level, which is nothing special, to collect a certain number of fruit, everything in Burton Bird is a little different from other games in the genre. For one, Burton moves in the direction you point him to indefinitely, until he hits an obstacle or you change that direction yourself, or until he dies. Well, it's an unusual control mechanic and definitely one that requires getting used to, but when you do, the game ends up being quite fun and rewarding. Levels, especially later ones, are really well designed and may require a bit of planning for completion at times, which is pretty cool for those who also like puzzlers. Burton Bird features special blocks that allow movement in just one direction through them, and different enemies with various movement patterns and behaviors. Unlike most other games in the genre that would require you to either play from the beginning on each game restart or use long and convoluted password systems, Burton Bird saves your progress after each and every level, so you're good on that front. It's a unique and not too well known game that definitely deserves more spotlight, even if it's going to be now, more than 25 years after it released originally. Mid to late 90s were the time when most Western developers dropped Amiga support and focused on platforms that still had some potential life behind them. Not all regions are the same though, and in countries like Poland, Amiga was not only still a viable gaming platform, but also one devs kept releasing new titles for. Cyberforce is an excellent example of such game. At first glance, it may look like a flashback clone with the side view platforming and a similar plethora of moves, but besides some superficial similarities, it's an entirely different game. The game is in Polish only, but can be enjoyed even if you have no knowledge of the language whatsoever. It's helpful to understand it, but not necessary. Story-wise, a certain doctor predicts the end of the world in a nuclear war, and surprise surprise, he's right. And the world as we know it does in fact end. Said doctor however managed to save his mind in a crystal, and years later you, a cyborg going by the very original and creative name of Cybus, will have to transfer the doctor's mind to another cyborg body so that he could live again. And to do so you'll need to travel through quite a few levels, solving puzzles and destroying various enemies. Cyberforce is an interesting title and one that had a lot of potential. Potential that was never fulfilled because of it releasing only in Polish, on a system that was long pronounced dead, and with some really annoying design issues. First being controls, which are pretty stiff and require a lot of patience and time to get used to, and second, the combat is entirely unforgiving. If you're knocked down, it's really hard to get back up and keep fighting. Not to mention that the ammo and energy pickups are pretty scarce. Bob's Bad Day is a definition of an obscure hidden gem. I knew nothing of it before it's been mentioned on Lemon Amiga forums, and none of my friends heard about it either. And yet, it somehow manages to have 52 votes on Lemon Amiga. Go figure. Anyway, it's a top-down action puzzler with level manipulation as a main means of traversal. Meaning that you rotate the level around your character, Bob, as he remains dead set in the middle of the screen, with levels rotating around him. It's a pretty neat graphical effect, similar to Mode 7 available on SNES, and works surprisingly smooth on the Amiga. There are 100 levels to beat, and as you progress through them, different power-ups will be introduced, like heavy or bouncy mode, gravity alterations, thrust and others. This and variety in level design keep the game fresh and fun all throughout. Despite the simple graphics and sound, Bob's Bad Day is pretty addictive even if it's a bit uneven in its difficulty level curve, where some levels are considerably more demanding than those before or after, seemingly for no reason, as if they were just all created at once and added one after another without setting them up on a proper growing curve. Benefactor is one of the best exclusives for the Amiga and sadly also one of the lesser known titles. It's a very unique puzzle platformer that's a mixture of Lemmings and Sleepwalker. Sounds odd, but it's so well executed and designed that you won't stop playing even for a minute to ponder about it. You control a small character, whose name is a wordplay on the title, Benefactor, and he has to save red tiny creatures from captivity that they're victims of. Each level poses a different logical and platforming challenge, and you have to use both your agility and those tiny red creatures to solve them. Little fellas can be tossed higher than you could ever jump, cross short paths that you would never fit through, even if you'd lose those few extra pounds that you carry, and they can be used to turn on and off various omnipresent switches and help in many other ways. They're like lemmings without pre-assigned skills and just do what's required where it's required, if placed on the right path. Benefactor was clearly a high-budget, high-quality game that had a lot of thought behind it, so I will never understand why it failed to gain wider audience and recognition. Especially that it was designed by DICE and published by Psygnosis, two giants of the industry and companies that most players knew very well and appreciated most of the games they were behind. But such is life, I suppose. If there is only one game in today's video that you have time for, definitely go for Benefactor. If there was one fictional TV series character that was so iconic it should be written into history books, it's Ron Swanson from Parks and Recreation. The man was epic, lived by his own code, and he loved bacon over anything else. Which makes perfect sense because bacon is pretty much better than anything else. But his favorite store was Food and Stuff. And every time I think of a game that you're watching, Tanx and Stuff, I think about that store and by correlation about Ron Swanson. What a legend. Tanx and Stuff is a simultaneous 4-player arcade tanks game. And it's not up to 4 players, it's always 4. If you don't have enough friends around, CPU will fill in the spots playing the way CPU does. So as best as it can, but nowhere near as good or unpredictable as a human would. But beggars can be choosers, so if you're alone you may as well play against CPU. But don't base your opinion about the game solely on that, because it was made with multiplayer in mind. In Tanks and Stuff, you're steering a tank. And stuff. If a boat can be called that, cause it's literally just a tank or a boat. Anyway, the game is played in time limit and you have to collect as many flags as possible within its confines, and more than any other player. You can however only carry up to 3 at the time, so dropping them off to secure location at your base is crucial. Especially that other tanks may try to steal them from you by destroying your vehicle and picking them up. That however is not only limited to others, and you may very well do just that too. So, as you can imagine, in multiplayer games with others, hardly anyone ever looks for and collects the flags only, and most people focus on hunting each other while picking up odd random flags here and there. It may not sound like much, but it's hella fun, provided you have someone to play it with. Sneech looks like a multiplayer snake, plays like Tron, and feels like an odd take on Deathmatch. And if that sounds like something you'd be into, then great, because it's actually really fun. Especially that up to 6 players can play it at once, 4 on joysticks and 2 on shared keyboard. Overall, with CPU playing there can be up to 10 snakes at once on the screen. The playfield is constantly being filled with walls, obstacles and traps, and obviously same as in Tron, what you have to do is destroy the opponents by making them either crash into one of the aforementioned dangers or into your snake's tail. But if that was all, it would have been just another Tron Light Cycles variant, and it's clearly not. The game features plenty different power-ups that can be both picked up during gameplay or purchased in between the games. Sneech, however, is a game best appreciated when played and not heard about, especially that it's not the easiest and learning all the best tactics and how power-ups work can take a minute. So if you like to game with your friends and would like to sample one of the simplest in its design but in the same time very deep and replayable multiplayer experience on the Amiga, definitely give Sneech a try. Now, Springtime is a surprise. Not in reality, but this game. At least for me. On so many levels, man. It's a neat little puzzle platformer with a top-down view with a pseudo 3D movement mechanic. Springtime is played on a checkerboard patterned multi-rotating play area, with each part of the board multi-hinged in a way that would allow it to rotate, often over all 3 geometrical axes, X, Y and Z. The idea here is same as in most cheap B-movies. To get to the X, cause that's where the treasure is hidden. No treasure in this game though, but you still have to get the titular spring to the X. To do so, you have to walk around the game field and rotate it appropriately, constantly thinking of it in 3D despite the viewpoint being predominantly 2D, to create a path for the spring to drop on the aforementioned X. It sounds simple, but you'll quickly realize that it's anything but, and that you have to really get those cogs under the roof working to figure out some of the more taxing levels. Especially that every attempt is timed and you have only 99 seconds to complete each stage. So you have to get in the zone, familiarize yourself with quirkiness of Springtime's inner workings to be successful. As you progress through the game, it will feature more and more new mechanics, adding special tiles that will keep your brain working and gameplay fun and long-lasting. Springtime is tremendous fun and one of the better puzzlers on the Amiga, even if it originally was just a public domain title. When Perihelion the Prophecy came out, I was 12, perhaps 13. While not a kid anymore and already heavily invested into RPGs, I wasn't prepared for Perihelion, and even though I tried approaching it numerous times, I always somehow ended up bouncing off of it and landing with another game in my disk drive. Perhaps it was the initial difficulty or the brown-greyish tones of everything, or simply me not being mature enough to fully encompass and understand what I had been given a chance to experience. And even though now, dark, gritty and cyberpunkish aesthetics of Perihelion would be my dream world to visit in a game, I never completed it. And based on the amount of games that I'm interested in that are released yearly, chances are I never will. And that's one of my biggest failures of my personal gaming history. Still, since I've spent long enough on myself, let's talk a little about Perihelion itself. You're in charge of 6 characters whose races are odd and very intimate amalgamations of human and different animal and mechanical entities. And you have to save the realm that you live in from an evil being that's slowly materializing into your dimension, and is foretold to bring an end to it. The game is viewed from the first-person perspective when traversing, and battle sequences are top-down with a turn-based combat. Quite unique, at least for the time, was the skill leveling system that raised those that were more used faster than the others. It's one of those games that I've never seen a single negative review for, and that's definitely something worth mentioning. There's one thing that makes Super Gems special among all little-known games in this video. What, you may wonder? Well, unlike every single other game here, Super Gems was never released. In fact, we should not talk about it here because it shouldn't exist. The game's release was cancelled when its source code was stolen from the developers Keiko at a computer fair in 1992. So while it's considered a 1992's game, it in fact, in all the copies that can be found over the internet, is a bootlegged copied stolen version. Today, it bears no legal weight really, but it's an interesting fact about it, don't you think? When Her Majesty's crown jewels were stolen by a master thief, a quartet of heroes is summoned by her to recover them over 104 increasingly more difficult levels. Super Gems is a mixture of Keiko's earlier Gem X and Bomberman, with tons of power-ups and beautiful anime presentation. It also features one of the most unusual approaches to puzzlers I've ever seen. Namely, all levels can be completed by one person, or even up to 4 playing cooperatively. And you could say that there's plenty of games that allow for a simultaneous 4-player cooperation, but riddle me this. Name one that happens to be a puzzler. Exactly. Toasty! Wacus the Detective, which is pronounced Wacus actually, is a side-scrolling platformer and another of those very late Polish games to release on the Amiga. It is however another one of those that you don't need to know any Polish to enjoy it. You will miss a backstory from the intro without it, but I will brief it here for you so you're not lost. Not that a story in a platformer has ever been deep or was important in any way, but at least you'll know. A particular collectioner has been robbed of his valuable precious coins, and he asks our protagonist to recover them. That's it. Deep, right? I feel motivated already. Anyway, the game is divided into 3 big worlds. After completing each you receive a passcode so that you could restart the game from that point next time. The levels are full of environmental dangers and various enemies, and you have to either avoid or dispose of them with your pistol. There are some sporadic puzzle elements here and there, especially with figuring out how to open certain doors, but other than that, it's a pure platformer with a pretty decent graphical and sound design. It uses ham mode to display 64 colors on screen at once and offers a very fluid animation engine. Oh, and if you type in KROWKI in your game's main menu, you will unlock access to a hidden minigame. It's not groundbreaking in any way, but it's a nice addition to this already pretty good package. So, that's it. Another 10 amazing games that were somehow overlooked by general audience and never became popular enough to write themselves onto the pages of gaming history. Arguably most, if not all of them, deserved much more, but never got a chance to shine. If any of these spark your interest or you think that some other obscure titles could be covered but hasn't been yet, hit me up in the comments below and let's discuss it. Who knows, I may include those games in future episodes, as Amiga easily has plenty enough unknown gems to cover a few more of these. Like the video if Amiga was the best system to spawn in the 80s, subscribe if it still was in the early 90s, and share the video if you break joysticks playing on it even today. And if you're feeling especially frivolous and in a giving mood, I have a Patreon and YouTube memberships, and either would help immensely. Videos are released approximately a day early on Patreon, and I also post constant video progress and channel updates there if you're into knowing and being able to influence what this channel will evolve to become. I would also like to thank my current Patreon and YouTube members who are just the most amazing beasts ever, and people who help this channel get better. So thank you. For now though, this is all, so have a good one and I'll see you next time. Peace.